I wanted to spend a couple of minutes sort of reminiscing a little bit about TeraGrid as we bring it to a close. We aren't quite done yet, but we're pretty darn near. Essentially at the end of July we will have finished our transition activities. So I wanted to say just a few words about that and sort of set up a little bit of context for the transition of programs, because I suspect that there are some of us who have been living this for several years now. But many of the folks in the community don't necessarily know the context of what's going on, and I'm not going to go into the gory details. But I will at least try and set up what's going on at a high level. So some of these slides, if you've been around TeraGrid or come to these meetings, you'll recognize some of these things. And I have to say that as I was reviewing my slides this morning, and I'll make this comment in a minute again too, I was struck by the thought that was expressed yesterday in our keynote by Nora Sabelli about how we have models in our minds about the way we think about things. And so I'll mention that a couple of times as we go through the way we think about things, and the way it struck me that it's more there than I had realized. So within TeraGrid we have this three-part mission of supporting advanced computational science and across multiple domains, bringing in new communities and users, and providing resources and services that we can extend into a broader infrastructure. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but it is again, it is a model of how we think about what we have done in TeraGrid for the last 10+ years. Both in terms of what we have provided to the community and in the complex organization that we constructed over time, largely by incremental process. We've always tried to encapsulate what we do within a TeraGrid with a few objectives, and so we had this deep, wide, and open model in our minds. So deep science, enabling large-scale science and engineering, and allowing folks to be more productive with an integrated set of resources that we provide to the community, looking to address the key challenges of users. Trying to bring these capabilities to the broader science community, and one of our, I think, key successes throughout the TeraGrid project has been the emergence of the science gateways, and I think many people are aware of that. But I would say it's one of the things that we would hold up as a great success of TeraGrid. And then always looking to include others in the environment that we are developing, and in our partnership with other projects, to allow folks to have access to a broader range of resources and services. So here's another key use of models in our mind as to what the way we describe TeraGrid, and this is a couple of ways that we've thought about it along. One is as an instrument. So in our mind we use an instrument as a model for the way for what it is that we have provided, and it is a computational data and visualization and services instrument. But in many ways, as was mentioned in one of the science talks yesterday, using computing as a microscope, we've thought about it as a more general instrument for the accomplishment of science and the furthering of science. Although it was largely composed of high-performance computing resources, networks, data resources, and the like. It's also a service. A big thing that we have done under TeraGrid, and has been very successful, is the support that we've provided to the community. And as we have gone through planning for this transition to the new program, that's something that was reiterated over and over by those that we went and interviewed and talked to about what would they like to see in a new program. Over and over, it was the support that they got from the staff that was one of the most important things that they had at their disposal. And of course, as I think everyone in this room knows, that this is freely available to academic researchers through an open peer review process. We've provided a lot of resources, and just wanted to make a note about that as we move forward, because as we come to the end of the TeraGrid, there's also the end of availability of a number of resources that have been out there for a while, with the continuum of a slightly smaller set. So recently, meaning within the last year, we've seen well, actually maybe a little bit more than a year now. We've seen several new resources emerge or will emerge soon with the Track 2D awards of a little bit ago, with the RDAV systems, which I think there have been talks about many of these in the program. Last year, NSF funded an additional set of resources through a Dear Colleagues letter, a couple of other things that have been done at NCSA. So those are all relatively new resources that are anticipated to continue into the new program. Of course, Ranger and Kraken, the very large resources that we have, will continue. But many other the resources that have been available through TeraGrid will retire as being available under XSEDE. The support for those will expire, and so we will have a perhaps somewhat smaller set, although of course they always grow in capability over time. We've had a lot of impact, and this is a slide I grabbed from a little while ago, but it was one that really was intended to show that while we are supported by the NSF, and we often have a focus on supporting NSF-funded researchers. In fact, we support researchers who are funded by a number of agencies, and of order half of the resources go to NSF-funded research activities, and the other half are supporting science and engineering and other research activities funded by other agencies, most notably, as you can see here, by DOE, NIH, and NASA. But we do have a smattering across other agencies. So this program really has had a really significant impact. And as you can see on the left side of this slide, at least in calendar 2008, when we last went through the exercise of doing this analysis, we supported research that was tagged directly as being supported by the resources and services that TeraGrid provided of $91.5 million. That's a lot of research activity. And this is not the full awards that they had for the research that they were conducting within their projects, but only that fraction that was directly supported by the resources that we provided them. When you look at the larger projects that they were a part of, this number is well over $250 million in a single year. So that's a lot of research activities by a lot of agencies that are being supported by this program. Of course, across lots of disciplines, we've shown various charts like this over time. It has slowly changed. We've seen some of the fields emerge and take a larger fraction over time. Particularly molecular biosciences. If you looked at this 10 years ago, they were a very small fraction of the pie, and these things have evolved over time. But I think really the point here is that we are supporting a broad range of disciplines. There are always new disciplines and fields arising that are making use of the types of resources and services that have been provided and will continue to provide as we move forward. I mentioned before that Science Gateways is one of what I think is one of our great successes throughout the TeraGrid years. I would say that we were, to some extent, a victim of our own success. Early on in doing Science Gateways, we provided a lot of direct, ongoing support for Science Gateways, and as they began to grow in number and the amount of support provided to them, we've had to sort of back off and into a mode of providing advanced support, if you will, to those developing gateways for periods of time, as opposed to a longer-term engagement and direct longer-term support of gateways. It's a good problem to have. It was difficult to go through. But these things have been very successful. I'm not going to go into much detail about those because I think many folks here are familiar with them. And we've had a lot of impact in the community. So this is actually taken from last year. We haven't completed our final report for the TeraGrid project. That's something that is in process right now. But looking at what we had reported last year, just in that year, we had 1,200 projects that we were supporting. And this eye chart list of disciplinary areas is a truncated list. The font size on the slide was getting too small, so I cut the list off. Again, you know, this is meant to demonstrate that there are many, many disciplines that are being supported, and it's a growing set. We should have actually printed copies of these highlight documents, but we annually have produced a couple of highlights documents, one for the science and engineering side and one focused particularly on EOT. and I provide the links to those, and those provide more extensive stories about what was being accomplished in those particular areas and how TeraGrid supported those successes. Okay, so as everybody knows, that we're in a transition period here, getting later into that transition period as a matter of fact. We are just completing a 1 year plus another 3-month extension of the original TeraGrid, well, I don't know if I can say original TeraGrid, but of TeraGrid to meet up with the beginning of the XD program. So we had a deferral of the original planned start of XD by a year, plus a little bit more now. NSF funded an extension to TeraGrid to bridge into the program. Due to scheduling issues, to put it simply, an additional 3 months of support was provided to get us to the start of the new program. We've spent a lot of time making sure that things are transitioned smoothly into the new program. And if you see hiccups in that process, I want to know about it. Because we've put a lot of effort and a lot of planning into making sure things transition smoothly. We will bring in new capabilities over time, but a boundary condition of the problem for us was not to be disruptive to what people are doing and what they're trying to accomplish, so that they don't have an impact, a negative impact, as we move into the new program. Okay. So there's this new program, Extreme Digital, that actually, just to give a little bit of history, is the third generation of the TeraGrid program, and I put that in quotes because that's not what the program was originally named, but it is what we have come to call it over time. So it started with this distributed and extended TeraScale facility awards early in the 2000s. Around mid-2000s, that was renewed, if you will, with this Grid Infrastructure Group award. I talked about that a little bit yesterday at the town hall session, plus the resource providers. And now we're going to be moving into this Extreme Digital phase of NSF's series of programs here. So to be clear, the XD and the integration services, which I'll talk a little bit more about in particular shortly, really is about integration of these capabilities and not about the resources themselves. With the exception of a couple of awards, the remote visualization and data analysis systems, the hardware resources were not part of the original XD solicitation. I'll talk about that solicitation briefly. So resource provider awards, resource providers now called service providers under the new program are separate awards. However, they are tightly coupled to what's going on, and they will actually continue as production resources to report their normal reporting through the same mechanism and jointly with XSEDE. Okay, so I mentioned this. We want a smooth transition. If there's anything that folks are noticing as hiccups along the way, we want to know about it and we want to address those things. Again, a lot of effort has been put into planning the transition to make sure that there's a minimum impact to folks who are trying to get things done. Okay, so now on to the new program. TeraGrid has been a wonderful thing, but we think that we can do more, and we can do a lot better in many areas. So to put a little context to this, for those that have not enjoyed the fun of the last 3+ years of a competition for XD, it was a bit over 3 years ago that the XD solicitation was issued. It was an extremely complex solicitation. It made mention of the high-performance computing and storage services, which were really things that had already been awarded or would be awarded under separate solicitations. So these are Track 2 awardees and others, such as I mentioned on the resources slide previously. As part of that solicitation, there was sort of 2 sub-solicitations. The first one being for these remote visualization and data analysis services, and 2 awards were made for that as a result of that program, or of that solicitation. And that whole review was run separately from the rest of the other sub-solicitation, if you will, for integrating services. So this is the way that NSF initially laid it out to us, as a coordination and management service, technology audit insertion service, the advanced user support service, and the training, education, and outreach service. In the end, what XSEDE has done is not organized it quite this way, but it's not too far off. Mostly because we felt we could manage things more effectively and present services better to the community. As has been mentioned a couple of times in the conference, the Technology Audit and Insertion Service was awarded per schedule. The remaining 3 services were deferred for a year, and again, I'm not going to go into the details of that joyous period of time. But we resulted in the end with an award to imminently be made, hopefully, for XSEDE, and this has become, I think, a much better thing through the process. We went through a great deal of planning as part of the deferred start for the new program. Planning grants were awarded that allowed us to do a lot more analysis of what the needs of the community were and are expected to be, and therefore plan out a much better project to move forward with and focus what funding we had on the most important things. So this is a statement of the vision of what we have for XSEDE moving forward. And what I will note here is that, and I'm not going to read it to you because I think everybody else in the room can read, but what I think I will note to you is that we don't mention HPC in this vision statement at all, because that's not really what XSEDE is about. HPC is a necessary component, and I think that some people forget that because of the shift in focus and the way we present things. It's absolutely required, but it is not have the same level of focus and attention that we have had to date under TeraGrid. We learned a lot of things in the proposal development time. We always knew there was a great deal of need for computing and computational resources of a variety of types to support science effectively. But we really were educated quite a bit at the diversity of the sorts of things that people need moving forward. As we went out and spoke to folks in the community, we were asking them what were the things that they were going to need by the time we got around to 2015 or so. And many of them had pretty good ideas of what they wanted to do. And that was gratifying that they were thinking that far ahead. But it also placed a number of challenges in front of us to be able to try and address those needs. It also reinforced the notion that we had that really what we need to focus on is the productivity of the researchers and what they're able to do, and not so much on the particular technologies that we might be providing. And so our focus came that way. Here is just a subset of some of the fields that we've gotten, we got some very good input from, and it's just a sampling, but it also, I think, shows that there's a broad range of things that folks were looking to be able to make use of, and the sorts of services and capabilities that they need to be successful. So we expect to be supporting many, many projects, certainly more than we have under TeraGrid, and understanding the breadth of requirements was really important for us. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of things that we discovered and learned about when we were collecting these needs. But one of the outcomes was that there were a number of things that we had the opportunity to do to really increase productivity for folks who would be making use of these things by taking the right approach on things. So this is a list of examples of what we could do, we discovered that we could do, that would really have a positive impact on the productivity of the community we're trying to support. And again, I'm not going to try and read these all in detail. Sorry for so many words on so many slides. It's really hard to put a very large program into a brief presentation. The slides will be available to look at later if you like. But there were a number of things that we could do, and again, a lot of these things have to do with providing a solid and stable infrastructure and a set of services around them, and not focusing on individual technologies necessarily. So as one of the examples, we spent a lot of time talking to the folks at SCEC. Actually, I think there's a session after the plenary from that group on CyberShake, and I did see a visualization from them last night, which was quite nice. But we went and talked to them and we said, okay, by 2015, what do you need to be doing? What are you trying to do between now and then to get there? And what we discovered in their need to be able to predict ground motions in order to then provide information to engineers and others designing buildings to be able to do it more effectively and more safely, we discovered that they had some real needs. Some of those they knew pretty well, but they're going to grow and scale quite significantly. But I think there were three elements that were really important that we discovered. One is that they still had a very significant HPC requirement. But even if they had been able to run their HPC job, they weren't done. They were far from done. They had to do many, many small, short jobs that would allow them to do the analysis necessary for them to be able to produce the information necessary for the engineers to impact their building design. And this represented a mode of use of resources that we hadn't strongly supported under TeraGrid. The other thing that was important is that in order for them to conduct all this, they needed strong support for workflows. And this is something we discovered time and again, the emergence of importance of workflows over time. So as we were developing our plans, we had predicted some of these things, but it also resulted in more effort being put into our partnership with OSG to provide those sort of high throughput resources that are important to support this kind of science. So I guess I actually just said a lot of these things. So working with OSG, providing workflow support, there's networking infrastructure that's important for these things. All these went in as requirements to the design of the environment that we were developing. Another nice example is from the IPlant community, and this really was a good example of data-driven science that has a need for petascale capabilities in order to do the analysis. In the hallway yesterday, I was talking to Dan Stanzione, who they had actually recently done some of this work with IPlant, so the folks at TAC had done some very nice work with them. And if I remember correctly, there was several hundred years of computing necessary as far as the researchers could determine in order to do one of these first analyses, which require pairwise combinatorial comparisons for phenotypic traits. And they had expected it to be 160, 170 years, and they completed it within the course of a few days, if I remember correctly, on 128 nodes or 256 nodes. And, waiting years versus waiting days is a big difference in their ability to do science. So, again, this requires some different things in the infrastructure that we hadn't necessarily provided very well in TeraGrid. They need access to data that's in a lot of different databases in a bunch of different places. So they need an infrastructure that allows them to get access to those things in secure ways. They need a network in order to move that data around, and they still need an HPC component in order to actually do the analysis. So that, again, also had the requirement for workflow tools in order to support the execution of that. And the last one I'll use for today is in brain science. So this is actually connected to National Academy of Sciences Grand Challenge problem in understanding the brain. And the idea is to really fully understand the wiring of the human brain, but that takes a long way to get there. So as an initial start, this group was looking at just a cubic millimeter of brain tissue, and being able to fully understand how that is wired up at full resolution of the synapses within the brain. Turns out to be a pretty tough project, a lot of unstructured data, a lot of high-resolution imagery that they have from electron microscopy, and the need to integrate that into single models. So there, again, is a bunch of data. So we keep finding these large data problems. Again, that data has to also be provided out to the community, particularly the results of constructing this model. So there's an enormous amount of data they need to move around, and then the other aspect to this one really is there needs to be a facility for them to, over a longer term, store the data and make it accessible to their community for further research. Completing this really only gives a model around which a lot of research would then be conducted. So the need to be able to provide that data out to the community is very, very important. Okay, so those are just some examples of science problems that we ran across. There were many, many more that we talked about, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of the sorts of things that we saw and how it was driving some of our thinking. At the larger picture, what we're really trying to do is provide a national cyber infrastructure ecosystem, something that really allows people to embed the resources and services that they need, and in particular ones that may or may not be offered directly by XSEDE. So, as I mentioned, and I said this yesterday during the town hall, we took a very different point of view. We were taking the point of view of the researcher trying to accomplish things and create around them an environment that has everything that they care about, be it data, be it collaboration tools, be it compute systems, visualization resources, instruments that they have access to. All of these things are important to them, and from the point of view of the researcher, they really don't care who is providing those particular things. They want it in a single environment that's accessible and allows them to share things with their collaborators. So a lot of our effort went into thinking about what is the underlying infrastructure necessary to support those kind of environments, and to be able to do it in ways that provide a great deal of stability, but also looks at the issue of evolving technologies that are emerging, the need to support new communities and new requirements. So we have a specific notion in our architecture about evolution of that architecture. Jay mentioned yesterday some of the things about user services, as did Nancy, and I think Ralph came in a little late, so he didn't get to mention things, but Nancy, I think, covered it well. In supporting the user community, again, that was repeatedly stated as one of the most important things that folks got from TeraGrid. So we put a lot of effort into thinking about how we're going to most effectively make use of the resources we had for providing support to the community in form of direct user support and advanced application support. This had been done in an increasingly coordinated fashion throughout TeraGrid, but we put a lot of formal practice into how we're going to conduct this going forward with XSEDE. We also recognize that, particularly as new technologies and capabilities emerge, we may or may not have the support expertise as part of the project to provide that support. So we've reserved a bit of funding in order to go and bring in folks on a contract basis if necessary to provide that expertise. In a much shorter time frame, we can then evolve our staffing over time to cover the things that we see. But in order to be able to respond as best as we could and as quickly as we could to the needs of the community, we've done that. We've put in a lot more practice in how we manage those projects. We did not, I don't feel, under TeraGrid extract as much in the way of lessons learned from the projects that we've done. And we hope that with the processes we're putting in place that we can do that, so that can improve our documentation, it can guide our decisions in making staffing hires, it can help to guide the directions and new capabilities that we provide to the community. In the area of extending impact, and again, this talk is sort of backwards for the town hall yesterday, so I'm doing a lot of backwards references. Scott made some references to these sorts of activities. These are largely the training, education, and outreach activities. And I think there are some very important things. There was a nice session last night on the TEOS activities, a BOF session that I was in for a while, and they went through a lot more detail, a lot of these offerings that we're going to have. Many of these are new things under XSEDE as compared to TeraGrid. Certainly, the scope of the community that we are targeting is much broader, and using this notion of campus bridging, and unfortunately Craig Stewart was unable to be here. He will be leading the campus bridging activities for us, but there are some other folks, Richard Kneffer and a couple of others from Indiana, who are here to speak with if you choose. We're going to put a lot of effort into expanding the efforts that we have had under the Campus Champions program into other areas to bridge to campuses and allow them to integrate and support their integration into the national cyber infrastructure to support collaboration and sharing of resources and these sorts of things. These certificate and degree programs, I think, have generated a fair bit of interest. Certainly, I think these ideas were well supported by some of the comments that Nora made yesterday in the development of not only future workforce but future teachers in order to sustain better preparation of the future workforce. I'll say a couple of words about architecture, and by architecture on this particular slide I mean our distributed systems architecture. People may call it middleware or whatnot, but when I say the term architecture, I don't mean a software stack, I mean a design. And a software stack is an implementation of that design. Our intent is to actually create, and we have made significant progress on detailing out an architectural design to satisfy the requirements that we have determined and we continue to collect. Under TeraGrid we had a software stack which had implicit to it an architecture, but we did not have an explicitly defined and documented architecture. I think we learned a lot, and there was a lot of informal practice that we practiced under TeraGrid that we have now formalized in XSEDE, which I think will allow us to move along much more effectively and with fewer hiccups along the way. So this architecture is being documented and specified in great detail. We're putting a lot of systems engineering practice into this, which was a huge step forward, I believe, that allows us to carefully look at the requirements that we have determined from the community and use that to drive the design of the architecture. To allow us to make trade-offs for different options, because those will exist, and to also allow us to sensibly and methodically move forward, both in bringing in new capabilities and deprecating those that are old and unused anymore. But doing this in a very careful way is very important because of the complexity of what we're trying to do. So I mentioned that we'll be documenting the architecture, and this is where I actually have a question for you all. There will be, at some level, a very detailed specification of the architecture. However, that's not a digestible thing for many people. And so we're taking the approach of using views to describe the architecture in the context of the particular stakeholders that we're trying to relay the information to. So yes, there will be a bunch of detailed specification documentation that most people will find very dry reading, but what's important is that many of the folks who are making use of this architecture, supporting it, deploying the implementations, need to understand what's important for them to know about this, how it works, what they need to do. So these different views provide that contextual representation of the architecture. And so this is really only a short list of different stakeholders that we will provide alternate views of the architecture for. And if there are views that you are interested in, we want to know. We actually had a meeting late last night talking about a lot of these details and what are there was a significant meeting held a little bit more than a week ago detailing out what are the needs for each of these different views. But if there's a particular view you're interested in, namely the one you care about, please let us know, because we want to put that into the mix of being able to provide effective means for everyone to understand what we're doing and what they need to know. The XSEDE project is managed significantly different than the management of TeraGrid, which, as I said, really grew over the process of incremental growth and addition of a variety of awards and such. I wanted to recognize the folks who are actually involved in this project at this point in time. We made mention of it during the town hall. You know, myself as the PI, but also my co-PIs, Jay, who I see over here, Patricia, I don't know if I saw her in the room, Ralph is around here somewhere, and Nancy is probably in the room also, unless she's still out running. I hope they're back from that. Maybe that's where everybody was, and that's why nobody was here to stand up. They were all out running, and they knew that I would be talking, and it wasn't really that important. So, And then the list of other partner institutions, which is a larger set than we had under TeraGrid in the end. And they represent bringing in a lot of this specialized knowledge and expertise that we really needed to round out what we were looking for to accomplish the goals that we had determined. The governance model, and maybe for many of the folks out who are user community sorts of folks, don't really see this too much. It's very different than what we had under TeraGrid. We had essentially it was led by a collection of PIs of different awards with an elected chair. That was me. And so they were all independent awards to NSF, and it was difficult for any strong central management of the project. To the credit of all the PIs, they worked together very well, but that didn't have to go that way. And points of contention were dealt with congenially, but there was always a potential that things could go wrong for us because we had no real control in a fiduciary sense of what was going on. However, going to a very strong centrally managed project is not necessarily the right thing either. When you're talking about a project that has of order 250 individuals involved with many activities that they're conducting, trying to have a very small number of people manage at a detail level all those things it just doesn't scale. So we had to come to a model that appropriately balanced the ability for people to make decisions and to manage things against having some strong central management of the project. We believe that we've come to that. We benefited a lot from making use of various project management techniques, and we made some decisions about how we plan to manage the project. So it is quite possible for people to make budgetary decisions within a certain scope at their level of the organization if they're managing something. These things need to be communicated, of course, but there's very clear boundaries about which they can make those decisions and which they cannot. Which prevents problems from arising by making decisions that have cross-group or cross-area impacts. So again, the project management practices helped us a lot with this. This is probably the sort of thing that most of the folks on the side of things of making use of resources don't see too much. But what we hope that this results in is our ability to respond better to both opportunities and issues that arise. And to make the right decisions as quickly as possible. Okay, there was a mention on the last slide about the engagement of stakeholders. We often, through the time of TeraGrid, did a lot of work with communicating and getting input from the community and trying to involve them in what we were doing. But we hadn't specifically engineered into the project representation of the stakeholders within the governance model. And so we have, here is a sort of a short list of different ways in which we will be connecting with the community. Some of the things are fairly standard. You know, we'll be going out and doing surveys, and we'll be looking at trouble tickets and seeing what's going on there and trying to determine the problems that people are having. But we also will be holding panels and focus groups to try and get more specific input on particular areas that emerge. We will continue to do things like interviews, this notion of shoulder surfing, of really watching over the shoulder of people, particularly new people, to understand what are the issues they run into so we can try and knock down barriers as much as possible. But a lot of this will generate, and many of these things will be sources of needs that we discover from the community, which we will then codify as formal requirements. And something that we missed under TeraGrid, and I think we will benefit immensely from moving forward, is the formal management of these requirements, and using those and involving the community in the management of those. So we have this user requirements evaluation and prioritization working group. The primary intent of that group is to take all these determined requirements and prioritize them. Of course, we have a fixed amount of budget and resource to accomplish things. But this group will say, here is the order in which you need to go after them, and there will be direct user and other stakeholder involvement in this working group to help us prioritize them and make sure that we're doing it in a way that's responsive to the community. We have a lot of assessment involved in in the project. So not only as we develop plans and determining whether they match the user requirements, but as we prepare to roll things out, going through usability panels and such to make sure that they actually respond to the needs that were expressed by the community. And then we have some mechanisms by which stakeholders are formally represented in the management structure of the project. So we have a formally defined advisory board, primarily constructed of leading users in the community and leaders from the broader community to provide input to the project. And we will work with them on a regular basis, not only to review the things that we have done, but to take a look at our plans before we move forward with them, and to assure that we've taken into account what they see in the broader community. We have a user advisory committee. This is really for all the folks who are in the trenches trying to make use of the infrastructure and accomplish work. And often this will not be PIs or leads of research groups, but they're postdocs, they're research scientists, they're graduate students even, who on a day-to-day basis are trying to get things done, to provide a mechanism to get direct feedback from them into the project. The chair of the User Advisory Committee is a formal member of our senior management team, and they will meet as we do. Right now we're doing it weekly. So the senior management team, and they will be a voting member of that team, so they will have a very clear role and impact on the decisions that we make. Similarly, we'll be forming the Service Providers Forum. This is something that we're currently trying to clarify the definition of. The easy way to think about it is the resource providers under TeraGrid are fairly easily defined as service providers, but given the broader scope of the project, we have different types of service providers, and we need to determine what the appropriate representation of them will be. They might be providing resources or services that are not run through the allocations process. They might be provided in a variety of different mechanisms. So we're looking at how do we make sure that we are responsive to their needs and we're getting their input, and they're looking at our plans before we move forward with them. Again, the chair of the Service Providers Forum is also a formal member of the senior management team. Will meet with us regularly. They're a voting member, and their responsibility is to represent the needs and concerns of all the service providers. So we've really gone to great lengths to try and make sure that the community is plugged into what we're doing, and not just reacting to what we roll out, but looking at it from a planning phase and an evaluation phase, and providing feedback to us before we actually move forward with things. Okay, let me stop there, and I'll take some questions. I don't know whether I even ran long. I lost track of time, but so let me just stop there and take some questions then. John? I'm sorry?
Where does the quote come from?
I don't know whether this was something that Bill cooked up. Was it? It's not a quote. Do you take credit, Bill? And blame. Okay. It actually it is similar to a real quote that we discovered later, but. I'm sorry? Ahmad. Yeah. So this was something that really came out of, we wanted to have something that encapsulated in a few words, you know, sort of the vision that we had, and this is something that Bill and a few others put together for us, and I kind of liked it, so we've kept it. Galen.
Was it TeraGrid or TG, and is it XSEDE or XD?
You like to ask the fun questions, don't you, Galen? Well, so originally it was DTF, actually. And there was a proposal submitted against that solicitation called the TeraGrid. And over time, as new solicitations were issued by NSF and the program as a whole continued to grow, the name TeraGrid simply got adopted and became representative. And then ultimately, NSF adopted it into the naming of their programs later on. But you know, DTF and ETF did not say TeraGrid in them at all. But as they issued XD in the longer name, it's TeraGrid 3. Okay. XSEDE is a response to that solicitation, and it is not in any way intended to absorb the whole of that program. However, I suspect that many people will colloquially refer to it largely as XSEDE because it's sort of the biggest chunk of everything, right? In the same way that nobody really refers to TCS or other things, they never did that very much. They were TeraGrid resources. I don't know if that answers your question. Other questions? These are fun ones.
Well, exceeding CAP and helping, I heard you mention getting more teachers, more math teachers. I'm a math teacher. So how will they help to promote that, math and science education?
So the question is, how will XSEDE help to promote math and science education? And of course, I'm not the expert to answer this question because I don't know anything. I just have a bunch of smart people around me who know a lot more than I do. And Scott is perhaps better, but I'll take a shot at it. And actually, there was a really nice session last night, Teos Boff, that talked specifically about some of the activities that are going to be going on. And actually, Steve Gordon, more particularly, is focusing on the education activities. So there are activities in not only trying to incorporate computational science elements into curricula, but into the training of teachers. And so they're working now with some of the schools to incorporate into the teacher training programs modules that specifically speak to modeling and simulation and the use of computation as a learning tool. And they, of course, can speak more intelligently about this than I can, but we have a specific effort in this area to begin to develop these materials and to work with the programs, identify College of Ed and similar sorts of things going on in a variety of campuses, not just to get into the undergraduate curricula, but also to get this into the brains of teachers before they're practicing educators. And I'd say find Scott or Steve, who, I don't know, Steve, you in the room? I don't see him. But Steve Gordon also would be good people to talk to get more detail on it. Nathan, you aren't in a microphone, so you have to wait.
So you threw up several views by which people, stakeholders.
I'm sorry, can you get a little closer to the microphone? Okay.
You put up a slide with a lot of views which stakeholders can kind of look at XSEDE at. Do those represent the metrics by which, or some of the metrics by which you'll be evaluating the program?
So one of the interesting things is that we weren't given metrics by which we would be measured. We were asked to determine our own. The metrics of success for infrastructure projects is really hard, particularly those that are supported by the NSF. Because from an NSF perspective, and I'll speak for some of the NSF folks in the room, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, but NSF wants to see science impact. That's what they want to see. The fact of the matter is that as an infrastructure project, we are not doing science. We are supporting science. So what we need to do is find ways by which we can measure the impact we have on the ability of others to be more successful and productive in the science they're conducting. That's a pretty tricky thing to do. I mean, we can certainly always throw up lots of metrics about utilization of resources and services and network utilization, compute cycles delivered, all these sorts of things, but none of those say anything about the science. And our practice to date has largely been providing a set of successes that we have been a part of on an annual basis. It's difficult for us to predict what successes will emerge in the coming years, although we did do a lot of legwork with a variety of research teams in looking at what is it they want to accomplish, what are the requirements that result from that, and what can we do to satisfy those requirements. So, a metric of success is in 5 years, can we go back to the SCEC folks and say, you know what, we've got everything that we had asked for and we're able to really be successful, and here is the science that we're producing. at the same time, we can't wait 5 years for results, right? And we need other mechanisms by which we can measure the impact. So another thing that we're working on is that we'll, as a means of trying to track this sort of stuff, we'll be publishing a paper about XSEDE, which gets us out into the tools that exist for citations and such. And certainly one of the metrics that we have used is simply what are the publications that we've supported. And we often ask for that information from those that have allocations and such under TeraGrid. We want to know, what are the publications that you've had that have been supported by what we've provided you. And that's been really nice. But again, that's not necessarily a measure of impact to their communities. So by publishing the paper and asking them to cite that in publications that they have, if we then look at the next level of citation, what papers are published that cite that paper? If those papers that we're actually citing XSEDE as a support are then cited by many other papers, that's a measure of impact to their community. I mean, they wouldn't be cited if they weren't important papers, right? Now, that's not the only metric to use, but it is one that we believe can help us understand what is the level of impact that we have, how do we impact different communities, and these sorts of things. The unfortunate part of that is it takes a while for us to get to the point where we can do that, because the paper has to have the work done, it has to get published, and then it has to get out into the community, and other papers need to cite it and get published. So it takes several years before we get to the point where we can actually start to mine this and get some real good data. But that's one of the things that we're trying to do to try and measure science impact. Dan.
The first part of your quote looks like it's from looks like it's from around 1910, but the whole quote seems to be unique. So whose quote is it?
Well, it isn't anyone's quote. It is similar to a quote from Robert Browning, but it was independently developed, shall we say. There may have been some subconscious influence. I don't know. An intentional reference. Okay. So it is nobody's quote, but there is some correlation with the Robert Browning code. So this question is, why are some resources being retired? That's a complicated question, but the simple answer is that, well, a couple of simple answers. Some of them have just run their life, and it's time for them to retire. They become too expensive to continue to support. Some have support arrangements for which they no longer have funding to support them. Some of the providers are simply getting out of this game at this point. So there's a variety of different reasons, but by and large, the resources that are retiring are older resources that are at the end of their life anyway. Nathaniel. Explain Blue Water's role in XSEDE. All right, so to be clear, even though I come from the same institution as those that have the award for Blue Waters, I do not speak for Blue Waters, just to be clear about that. While I was part of the proposal development, I am not funded on that project because I have a few other things to keep me busy these days. I have spent a fair amount of time with the Blue Waters project team already, identifying where they can actually leverage what we're doing in XSEDE. The fundamental line of reasoning here is that, all right, I don't know how familiar people are with Blue Waters, and I'm going to say some things, and if people don't understand it, they can ask. But access to Blue Waters is provided through, initially through awards called PRACs, and there are several science teams that have been formed and have been awarded PRACs by NSF to ultimately have access to the Blue Water system when it becomes available. Many of those science teams are also have been significant TeraGrid users and will continue to be significant XSEDE users. It is my firm belief, and I've had this confirmed by many of those who have PRACs, that integration of Blue Waters into the XSEDE environment is really important to them, largely for reasons of being able to move data around, but there are several other reasons. In fact, I guess it was 3 weeks ago, I had a pretty long meeting with Bill Kramer, who's the project director for Blue Waters, and went through a list of areas in which I think that we can collaborate strongly. Everything from them being part of data transfer mechanisms that we plan to support with an XSEDE, to security and authentication mechanisms for one-time password authentications. Looking at can the final review for allocations of time on Blue Waters be conducted by the same panel that does reviews for the XSEDE resources, because that means it lowers the load on researchers that are going to have access to both. They only have to submit one thing instead of two at that point. Again, that was one of the things that came out of our discussions with users about what they thought was really useful from TeraGrid, was being able to go and ask for access to all these resources through one mechanism. And I think this it's supportive of the same idea. So there's a pretty long list of things, leveraging expertise for advanced user support. As it turns out, at NCSA, in my group, my advanced user support group is split funded. Some of them are funded on Blue Waters and some are going to be funded on XSEDE. And right now, I don't have an easy mechanism for them to sort of trade time. But because a lot of their knowledge is specialized, you want to be able to do that to be able to support things effectively. So they're very open to these sorts of things, but they're also very concerned about making sure they're successful as a project. And so it's a matter of striking a balance. And so what I will say is that the discussions have been good thus far. In fact, they've talked about adopting our documentation templates that we're going to do, so that the documentation is presented in a similar way as what's being presented for the other XSEDE resources. So they're very open to a lot of these things. It's still a little early for them. They're far from a production mode, but some things that we need to pursue soon, like the documentation. They'll begin developing their user documentation very soon here as they get closer to their pre-production period. Kent.
John, I want to first make a statement and then ask my question. Each quarter, we probably get about 50 million SUs more SUs requested. So that's a constant line going up. And what I'd like for you to provide us is a little bit of information, if you can, about the roadmap for compute capabilities for the next 5 years.
So Kent has provided me a leading question. For some time, and what I will do is not provide you with a roadmap, but I'll give you a little bit of thought about what I have seen and looking what I can see is coming, right? The roadmap really is going to be dictated by what are the funding opportunities that are going to be provided to support new resources. But for the last couple of years, what I've been doing is just keeping track of what are the resources that are out there and trying to project forward what we think is coming. And you know, it's only a guess at what's coming, because until the solicitation is out there, you don't really know. But you know, we can make some educated guesses. And the point that Kent wants me to get to is that if you look at there are several charts that I've done, and I'm not going to try and show any here, but actually this chart is included in the ACCI task force for workforce development. So if you go and look in there, this was referred to a couple of times. In fact, Nora talked about it a bit yesterday. There's a chart in there that's, I think, attributed to me, or a couple of them, that look at what are the existing resources and what do we expect the resources to be over time. And the disturbing result that comes out of that at this point is that if you look at requests and allocations awarded, there's exponential growth over time. And if you, on that same chart, is the resources that are available, and that for a long time there was an exponential growth. The coefficient was different. You know, the requests were often 2, 4, 5 times what was available at any particular point in time. But the disturbing thing is that while previously those two lines tracked one another, even though they were separated, we don't really expect the demand for resources to tail off. But given what we can see moving forward and what the funding opportunities will be for significant resources, the availability line turns over, and that's a disturbing thing. You know, if you're a factor of 2 off of available versus what is requested, you know, people are going to hurt because they don't have quite what they want. But when that curve turns over, the difference between what people are asking for and what is available grows rapidly. And you quickly come into a situation where people need 10 times what's available, 50 times what's available, and it happens fast. And so the point of that was really, looking forward, there's a real concern as to whether there's going to be adequate, and this is really just about compute resources, whether there'll be adequate compute resources available to the community that people can request through things like XSEDE. Is that what you were looking for, Ken?
I was looking for some hardware on the board.
Well, so I'll repeat one thing that I think I said yesterday, and that is that the award to XSEDE does not fund any hardware. Okay, the funding for hardware comes through separate awards from NSF for things like Track 2s or the other systems that I mentioned that came up in the last year from the Dear Colleague Letter Call and those sorts of things. Those are independent awards, and XSEDE's role is to integrate them into the environment, but the funding for them does not come through this award.
John, to follow up on your answer to Ken's question, is this gap between requests and available resources, is that a growth in, I guess, all of the requests, or is it driven by a small number of very large users who are asking for a lot more?
So the question is this gap being driven by a small number of large users, or is it a large number of small users? And when you go and look at it, the answer is it's somewhere in between. I mean, there are a few very large users out there, and I think we know who a lot of them are. Some of them are here. And that's absolutely true that they have growing need. But if you look at the distribution of use by number of users and such, there is that small group that uses a pretty good fraction of it, but there's a much, as far as the time delivered, they don't account for the largest majority of that. You know, there's this larger set of users that need access to these resources that are at a moderate level. You know, when we go through the review panels, when these requests come in, you know, there's always a small group, you know, half a dozen or so very large requests, and then there's 100 that are at the next level down.
Moreover, with all the broadening participation focus that we do have, increasingly the assumption is that there will be something for them inherent in XSEDE space.
That's right. So to echo what Sergio was saying, given the broader scope of the project going forward and the intent to bring in a larger community of researchers, we expect that there's going to be a growth in this set of folks who have need for resources not at the really high end. Kent.
One statement about that, and that's true. For many years we've had what we call the top 10. And in the last year and a half, what we've been seeing is lots of intermediate requests coming in. Intermediate being anywhere from about 12 million to, say, 18 million. And then we have the top 10 above that. That's a small number that they could consume a whole machine by themselves if you gave it to them. But we are seeing quite a bit of intermediate level requests coming in. And so we have a nice smooth curve between low request, medium request, and large request.
That's right. Axel.
Just to continue, there's a different side. People that want to use local resources or build local resources get told, why do you need a machine? There's TeraGrid. So that's one of the things that goes into this, that the need for capacity is growing.
That's right. That's right. Other questions? I think we're running rather long, so. Oh, yes. So I couldn't quite hear you, but let me see if I got it right. You're referring to the XSEDE and OSG collaboration, and how does this happen at an administrative level? So there's a number of different areas in which we're going to be working with OSG. And the two primary things have to do with the outreach side of activities and leveraging a lot of things that they've been doing in that space and combining efforts. And the other is formally allowing for request for access to OSG resources through the XSEDE allocations process. They are a formal service provider in the XSEDE project, so they look in many ways like a Ranger or a Kraken or another resource. Like they are a different kind, which is why I said earlier we're still fully defining and fleshing out the details of what does it mean to be a service provider and what is a service provider. But they will clearly be another type of service provider that this expanded definition includes.
Does it mean the existing TeraGrid machines do not have the HTC capabilities in them?
They will not have the what?
HTC capabilities built in them?
Yeah, I can't quite hear everything you're saying, so. But there will be interoperability assured between the environment, and so the ability to submit a job into the OSG space, if you will, from an XSEDE host is the sort of thing that we'll be looking to be able to support. And we believe that we have everything necessary to actually do that. We need to make it happen, but we've done a lot of that testing, so I believe we know how to do it.